Hello, everyone. This is Renee Rentmeester. I'm the creator and executive producer of the Cooking Without Looking TV show and podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Micah Ranquist. Micah, how are you?
I'm well, Renee. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Micah. I live in southern Vermont, mid 40s, and I wanted to kind of be on this show because I love cooking. It's my therapy. I'm an orthopedic massage therapist, and a lot of times in my work, um, people's emotions get all over you, whether or not you want them to. And we all need some kind of outlet for those big feelings that come up, whether they are internally um, derived or they come from someone else. And cooking is how I deal with stuff.
Well, tell us, our motto is changing the way we see blindness, and I think you're exemplary of that motto. Tell us a little bit about your blindness journey.
So I was born with retinitis pigmentosa. Um, a lot of people know what that is. I don't necessarily need to dive hard into that. My mother figured out when I was about 2.5 or 3 that something wasn't quite right with my eyes. And at first, the pediatrician that she was taking me to was trying to convince her that I was just attention seeking, with doing things like clipping corners and
Oh my.
um, and like walking, ramming my head into the side of a table when I try to climb under it because I didn't see it properly. Eventually, she found an ophthalmologist that was willing to try to evaluate, a very little kid. You figure this was, almost 45 years ago. Um, Mindsets were much different then. So it was actually an ophthalmologist who had been born and raised in China who had this willingness to try to evaluate me. And lucky for him, I guess, I was an early um, I was an early reader. Kids' books are typically fairly large print, so I could see well enough to identify letters and stuff. So by the time I was 4, I was able to do the alphabet and whatnot.
Oh, that's
Again,
great.
45 years ago, yeah. Again, 45 years ago, I don't think that the pictorial visual cards even existed. I don't recall ever having seen them until I was older, when
Tell
one of
us
my
a little
brothers
bit
started
about
having.
what that is.
So instead of using an alphabet, you go in and have your vision tested and you read through the lines, identify the letters. It's the same thing. It's just with little pictures, simple black pictures on a white background. It might be a boat or a duck or a ball, things like that. It just things
Sure.
that little kids might identify as opposed to letters. Um, and so, he figured out that I was myopic at the time, which is just nearsightedness. Um, and so he started addressing that. I had my first pair of glasses when I was 3, and my vision was correctable to something close to 20/20 until I was about 8. So I learned how to read as a sighted kid. Things weren't always easy because kids are cruel. When you have these super thick glasses, and back in the day
Sure.
they were glass, not plastic, so they were heavy.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
and so I had these thick glasses with this strap around the back of my head to keep them on. And
Oh, you were a target.
yeah, I was a target, exactly. School was kind of miserable. Um, but I remember being able to like see stars and read license plates and stuff like that, and reading as an early reader. And I've always been a person of words. I love my words. I was that kid that would read the dictionary. I would read, soup cans and stuff. And
And you like
um,
Scrabble, right?
yeah, I do. Um, and
Me
so,
too.
yeah, Scrabble's a very cool game. Um, I could see normally ish until I was about 8. And then um, what we didn't know at the time was that I had RP. I didn't get an RP diagnosis until I was 26.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and so,
Did you keep going
doctors,
to the doctors?
Yeah, and they would make stuff up when I didn't know what was going on. For a long time, I was considered to have severe degenerative myopia, which is not actually even a thing. But he didn't know how to
But
explain
it
it, and
sounds
so
good.
it sounded good. Yeah, it sounded great. And it explained some stuff for me. It's degenerative. Keep getting worse. So I had that expectation set, which was appropriate for RP. I just didn't have the correct diagnosis. And then I was well beyond that designation of legally blind, that 2200 mark. I was well beyond that before I was even a teenager. So I had
Oh,
a rapid digression between the ages of 8 and 13. Um, and then while kids are still cruel, school got a little easier as a teenager because I started going to Florida School for the Blind, Florida
right.
School for
In
the Deaf
St.
and the Blind.
Augustine.
Yeah, yep, 207 San Marco Avenue. Still remember. Um, and uh, that's where I started kind of creating my identity as a blind person. My parents always raised me as one who I wasn't permitted to just play the blind card, so to speak. I wasn't allowed to just say, "Oh, I can't do this because I can't see well." I was always made to prove to myself that I couldn't do something. And I kind of took that into high school and just kind of lived through school that way, always being that person that's willing to try something new, something different. Getting on a tandem bike as a visually impaired person, being the pilot with a totally blind person behind me. Yeah, I was
Oh,
willing to try it.
wow.
It was fun. And then went to college after that. I have a computer science degree, um, and then vision continually degrading. Throughout the years, different. Sometimes, and I suspect this is the case with anyone with RP. Sometimes it'll have little steps down, and sometimes it'll have big steps down, and you
But
might
did
go
people treat
just
you
to,
better as you got older?
um,
Were they more
well,
understanding?
not not necessarily. It was more of um, I was um, less willing to be coddled, I guess is the way that I would put it. And people would try to, quote, treat me like a blind person, I wouldn't let it happen. And I would sometimes, when I was much younger, I had much less tact, I'm sure, and ended up probably being rude about it. But I didn't let people treat me differently. Um, so I would
But they
do,
weren't being bullies to you like they were when you were little.
not necessarily always, no, or at least not purposefully. Sometimes it's just a lack of understanding. Um, and then eventually it took some of the stuff that I learned in high school and after college. I never really used my college degree very much. I didn't like it.
What was your college degree?
Computer science stuff. I was data mining, computer programming stuff.
Sure.
That's boring. Um, so I actually,
A real
um,
snooze fest.
yeah, I actually became a carpenter and worked as a carpenter for a good while. Anywhere from like handyman work, putting up shelves or fixing people's front steps or building new front steps or building a deck or whatever. Um, and I was at the point then where, I couldn't, I couldn't read a tape measure. I couldn't read a bubble level or anything like that. So I just came up with ways of getting stuff done. Um, partly using, some stuff from high school, like what's called relative geometry, Euclidean geometry, where you're measuring angles relative to the things that are around you and relative to other elements of the project that you're doing instead of using, a specific, like a protractor or whatever, to accomplish things. And I was good at it. I liked the work. It just didn't really necessarily pay all that well, but it
So
was
how did
fun.
you get
I do it.
into what you're doing now?
I actually wanted to do this in high school, but I grew up in a culture where, you do what your daddy tells you to do, and he told me that all the money was in the computers, and he wasn't necessarily wrong. But so I went to school
It just
for
wasn't
computer
your thing.
science. Yeah, it's I don't like it. I worked in college as a personal trainer, which was kind of um, my first foray into the idea of the uh, the intricacies of the human body and how it moves, and the things I might be able to do to help it help other people, live in their bodies and work with their bodies. Then I got trained as a medical transcriptionist, which kind of enhanced my medical knowledge even more. And then eventually, um, the carpentry wasn't really paying super well. I did take on, jobs here and there doing different things like becoming a product specialist at a high-end vitamins and supplements company, which kind of furthered my understanding of the human body, unintentionally. Hadn't really even thought it was going to do that. I just needed work. Um, and then eventually I ran out of excuses as to why I shouldn't just go ahead and do what I wanted to do 20 something years ago, and got trained to become a Swedish circulatory massage therapist and loved it. And then I've been doing more and more training since then, leading to now being an orthopedic massage therapist.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful, and it's your own business. So, what
Yeah.
kind of advice would you tell other people who are blind or visually impaired about starting their own business?
Uh, Actually, so the part of what I did for the write up that you asked me to do for this recipe we're going to talk about, one of the things that I wrote in there was, the success of this recipe depends entirely upon the consistency of the cook. And I would say that would be the same for so many things in life, including starting and maintaining your own business, is be consistent. If you're going to do marketing, purposeful marketing, then don't be willy-nilly about it. Be consistent, in the language that you use, and the audiences that you target, and the frequency that you do your promotion, the way that you deal with your money and your taxes. Be consistent. Don't slack on, keeping track of all of your expenditures just because you don't feel like doing it that day or whatever. Just be consistent. I don't happen to do mine every day. I do all my expenditure stuff once every 2 weeks, my income and expenditures, and I just take an afternoon and just make myself do it. But
There
just,
you
yeah,
go.
be consistent.
Well, tell us about your cooking and about your recipe, Micah, because I know you're aching to get into it. So tell us about it.
So I've been cooking pretty much since I left home. My mother was not an excellent cook. We always had hot food because she felt that was super important. She was not a very good cook, though. So I started learning cooking, and she also was one of those like extremely neat kind of people, like an OCD level neat kind of person, and didn't really want for her kids to be in the kitchen making a mess for fear that she'd have to clean
I
it up.
think it's above OCD. It's sort of like this is my time to be by myself kind of thing too, right?
Maybe to some degree, yeah. Even though she didn't like cooking, yeah, maybe to some degree that's true. I hadn't really thought of it that way. But anyway, so I started learning cooking on my own, um, when I left school. So this is kind of, the earlier days of what we think of as the internet now. So there wasn't Google at the time. There was, like Yahoo search and Lycos search, and All Recipes was a website even then. and there wasn't YouTube. But so I would look up these recipes online, because that was easier than trying to deal with a cookbook for me, because I couldn't read regular print anymore, and some of the magnification devices at the time were just not great. So I would look
Right,
stuff up
right.
on the internet and try to get as much info as I could from the recipe, and look up all these different terms that I didn't know, and try to figure out exactly what all these different things meant. And I would try these recipes. Some would fail miserably more than once. But just keep trying and keep trying and keep trying, and eventually you'll get it. And I kind of fell in love with the science and creativity of cooking, and I've just kind of been cooking ever since. And I use science and consistency in my cooking, every time I cook. And now most people will consider me to be an excellent cook.
Well,
I
that's
think
great.
because of
Tell us about your recipe, Micah.
so what I'm talking about today is something that I'm going to use when we do the TV show part of this whole thing, um, is just how to perfectly roast or bake a chicken breast. Um, I think
Now
a
I
lot of
noticed
people.
you didn't include any herbs or spices or anything. Was that just like generic? What kind of herbs and spices do you like to add, or just salt and pepper?
So the reason that I kept it so very simple, just salt and pepper in this, is because that's what I'm going to be doing when I do the dish that I cook for the TV part of this. It won't need any herbs or spices or whatever. They're going to be Those other flavors are going to be other parts of the dish. One mistake that I did make in the write up that we did was, I didn't. It's because of ubiquity. Um, I didn't define whether this was a bone-in, skin-on chicken breast or not in the write-up, but the recipe is for a boneless, skinless chicken breast, and the specificity of time, the temperature, and stuff. That would be a different amount of time for a bone-in, skin-on chicken breast than what I wrote up on the recipe, which I can do. I can do a different write-up for those numbers at some point if anyone's interested in it.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I've sort of understood it to be skinless, boneless chicken breast, but so tell us a little bit
Because
about it.
they're so ubiquitous. Yeah, because they're so ubiquitous. That's most of what you find in stores, boneless, skinless chicken breast. So what I've learned over time is a boneless, skinless chicken breast. It's all about the consistency of time and temperature. And so you start with your oven at 350 degrees, wait for it to preheat, but then wait a little while longer, because a lot of residential ovens are not particularly consistent in the way that they distribute heat within that cavity, um, and nor are they truly accurately represented, because the thermostat, the temperature gauge, is unfortunately fairly close to the element. So the bottom of your oven is typically going to be a lot more cold than the top of your oven. And depending on exactly where you've got that oven rack, you may not have the success you're looking for with roasting this chicken breast. So I tend to let my oven preheat for at least between 10 and 20 minutes after it already says that it's preheated, to be sure that it is, in fact, adequately and appropriately preheated. I always have a pizza stone in my oven too, for just makes the overall thermal conduction more consistent. So
Good,
anyway,
that's interesting.
yeah. So fully preheated oven, 350 degrees, and then we're talking working with a chicken breast that is fresh out of the cooler at the market or out of your refrigerator. So that that level of cold, your average refrigerator should be registering somewhere between 36 and 41 degrees Fahrenheit. That's part of food safety rules. And literally, it's just so simple. Salt and pepper. You have a baking sheet, as opposed to like a big like a 9 by 14 casserole pan, because you want this chicken to roast and not steam. So something shallow, like a cookie sheet. I always line mine with foil because the last step in the process requires wrapping the chicken up in foil to let it rest. So I have my cookie sheet lined with foil, put a little bit of oil onto the chicken itself on both sides of the chicken breast, and then literally just chose salt and pepper for this recipe, and pop that piece of cold salt and peppered chicken on the cookie sheet into the oven for exactly 28 minutes. And after the 28 minutes, just set the cookie sheet up on whatever you're going to do. I set mine on top of the stove unless I've got a bunch of other things happening, and take that foil that you've got the chicken breast sitting on and use it to wrap up that piece of chicken nice and tight. The foil's not going to be hot for your fingers, so you can just, you don't have to use oven mitts. You can just pull the foil and wrap it up and let the chicken sit and rest in that foil for a minimum of 7 minutes. Usually like 7 to 10 minutes is kind of normal if you got other things you're going to be doing. And that's it. When it's done, it is just this perfectly roasted chicken breast that's never pink, and I've never had one be pink in the middle. I've had people look at it for me bunches of times. It's never pink in the middle. It's always juicy and tender, and it's never overdone and dry. It's just
Oh,
about
that
being
sounds good.
consistent.
That's usually the biggest mistake with chicken breast is that it just comes out like your shoe, just
Yeah, yeah,
a little
exactly.
overcooked. But that's great. So do you take that chicken and do you put it into a casserole or do you do something with it? Or what do you do with that perfect chicken breast?
Anything you want, really. In this particular case, when we do is it next week or the week after? I don't remember which we decided on. I'll be making kind of a taco-ish thing. So I'm going to be cutting that chicken breast into some kind of maybe like half-inch cubes or so, putting them on a fresh tortilla with some flash fried onions and peppers and a real sciency cheese sauce. Very simple. Doesn't take very long to make, and you got perfectly juicy chicken, and it's just awesome.
Well, that sounds great. Now you've got me hungry, Micah. So tell our listeners how they can reach out to you.
So pretty simple. Just Micah Ranquist. That's my only social media that I use presently is Facebook. So we can just find my name on there. It's MichaRanquist. That's on Facebook. And then my email address is also very simple, micah.ranquist@gmail.com.
Well, that's great. And that's again MICAH RANQUIST @gmail.com.
You got it.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us, Micah. And for those of you who want to see Micah's perfect chicken breast recipe, you can go to our website at www.cookingwithoutlookingtv.wordpress.com, and it's there under the blog section. So again, Micah, thank you so much for helping us change the way we see blindness, and we look forward to having you on our TV show.
Thanks, Renee.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.